Hello guys, it's Darksigner here from the German Duel Masters channel and welcome back to another video. Today I present you the first video out of our new top 10 series. So as our channel is here for a bit longer now, quite over a year now, and we haven't done any of these top 10 lists before, we figured it might be time for us to also share like our thoughts on what are the top 10 cards in each civilization and what are the top 10 cards in general in the Duel Masters TCG. And today we start with the top 10 light cards. But before we start, I wanted to share a few thoughts that came up in our thought process. So first of all, it's not my own idea. We discussed this in our YouTube channel group. People you know like Halfar, Spaulding, Loui and Hymne were doing like the work on these lists, and even though we were like more than one person, those lists are still highly subjective. So if you disagree with some of our picks and you think maybe something should be repositioned or we forgot about something entirely, feel free to just comment down below and share your opinion there. Maybe we can have a discussion in the comments about these lists. And before we start, I wanted to let you know which criteria we use to put these lists together. And first of all, the card should be playable in nearly every deck that uses that color. So for this video today, the yellow color, the light cards. So yeah, if the card is playable in nearly every light deck, definitely makes a spot on this list. Or if this is not the case, the ability should be that strong, it should be nearly broken, so that you really want to build a deck solely around that card itself. So yeah, it should be either very generic and played in nearly every deck of that color, or it should be that good that you really want to focus on that card and play that as your main card of your deck. And now let's just start with the number 10 spot, which is Palo Alesis Morning Guardian. And yeah, what can I say about this card? First of all, it has a nice like power to mana ratio. It's a bit undersized with 2.5k, but most creatures that have an ability are never like the same with the mana and power ratio. So if it has a good ability, it's most likely not 3 mana 3k. So I think 2.5 is very good here because it dodges like fire removal spells like Phantom Dragon's Flame and Volcano Charger. Additionally, the race is very good as well. The Guardian race, in my opinion, is the second best race in the Light Civilization, right after the Initiates. And its ability is really what gives this card the last spot on our list. Because during your opponent's turn, each of your other creatures gets plus 2k power. And the other effect is that it can't attack players and that it is a blocker. That's something very typical of a light blocker creature. But yeah, the blocker ability can come in handy, but also can be a drawback if your opponent is on something like Comet Missile or like Critical Blade or Windex. So yeah, blocker removal in general, but still the ability that everything gets plus 2k power helps you in many different decks. If you want to go more aggressive, it boosts your creatures to a point that your opponent can't really trade with them because they are too high powered. And in decks like Hydro Hurricane, where this is played, it helps your Mistria surviving fire removal spells and building up a huge wall. If you can play multiple Palo Alesis on board, this really creates a lock on the opponent where your blockers just get too strong, and then at some point just something like Scarlet Skytar or Crystal Paladin helps. Otherwise you just lose the game because you don't get through that huge blocker wall. And yeah, Now let's go to the next spot, to the 9th place, where we have Magnus, Vizier of Magnetism. And yeah, this has many similarities to Aqua Holcus from the Water Civ. And yeah, because it has the same ability, it's very simple. It's just when you put this creature into the battle zone, you may draw a card. Nothing much to say about here. It's just one cost more than Aqua Holcus and has 1k power more, so 3k. It has the best race in the Light Civ with Initiate, so it's a perfect evolution bait for something like Craze Valkyrie or Kisa Basiku. And yeah, maybe if you play a Gleis Magicula deck, this is also definitely an inclusion there. And yeah, Magnus is played in basically every aggro or mid-range deck that plays light, because it's just a light Aqua Holcus, like I said before. Yeah, nothing really special about this card, but still it's just such a solid card. It's so generic. If you play light and you need draw power, this is one of the first things that comes to mind, so that's definitely deserved its spot on this list. Now let's go to the 8th place, which is Bilix the Explorer. It has also pretty nice race with Gladiator. Definitely not in the top 2, but definitely like a top 5 race in the Light Civilization. Maybe the 3rd place, but something might be over Gladiators. I'm not too sure, but definitely not a bad race. And what this card does, like on the surface, it's just like a serious Vizier of Suppression. It's a 2 mana 3k blocker that can't attack players. But its abilities, when you put this creature into the battle zone, return a spell from your mana zone to your hand. So you can see this as an upside or a downside, because it's yeah, it's basically similar to a Thrash Crawler, but as you can only return spells with it, you can yeah, dodge its effect by not casting any spells in your mana zone. So this card makes its appearance here because it can be used in a variety of decks. It can be used in a Warlord Elsonius deck, which needs the Gladiator race. So there it's most of the time just used as a Serious. You don't charge any spells before turn 3, so you can play him on turn 2 and don't lose mana. And it's also played in like spell tutor decks, like the Phobos control deck, where it can revive spells out of your mana zone in the late game. So it definitely has many uses. That's why it's on the top 10 list, because it's not only like reduced to one deck, it's not only usable in Elsonius decks, it's also it also has uses outside of that deck. That's why it made this spot, but still not too high. It's yeah, still the beginning of the list. And speaking of Phobos, the deck, at number 7 we have Phobos Sanctum Guardian Q, the card itself. And yeah, this isn't really that generically usable. It's used sometimes in file control or some other control variants that use light as a spell tutor, but yeah, isn't used in too many light decks. You don't really say that it needs to be included if you play the Light Civilization, but it's just that good that it makes its own deck. So without this, the Phobos deck wouldn't exist, as it gives the name to the deck. The ability is just that good, and that you want to play a deck centered around this. Because if you can get a second one out, the ability stacks and you can search for 2 spells and so on. If you play the third one for 3 and the fourth one for 4, that's just yeah, such a great ability. And yeah, the races are all also pretty great. The Survivor race is, yeah, it has its benefits because it has the Survivor ability, but if you watched the archetype analysis video on Survivor, you might have noticed that it's not really that great in a Survivor based deck. But yeah, like said before, in the deck on its own, it's just that great that you want to use it. The Guardian race yeah, it's not really good in its own deck because you don't really play Guardian support, but it's still good that it's a Guardian, because if you play against something like Hydro Hurricane, where they play Petrova, and they usually want to call Guardian to boost up their Mistrias and their Palo Alesis, and by that they boost your Phobos as well. So it's yeah, a nice addition that it's also Guardian. And at number 6 we have Faligrn Guardian. Yeah, some of you might think, why is this over Phobos? Some of you might think, yeah, that's fine, and we've come to the conclusion that it should be over Phobos because of being more generic. Yeah, it is played in the Phobos deck, that's true, and Phobos can easily gain more advantage than this card by stacking its ability. But Faliga is just, yeah, it has its own deck being called File Control, and yeah, it creates something like an infinite cycle with darkness retrieval spells like Morbid Medicine. So you can create an infinite resource cycle with that. That's also just a sign that it's that good that you might want to play a spell cycle deck around it. And it's also played in the Phobos control deck and in Hydro Hurricane or Marino, sometimes as a one-off just to retrieve spells. So it's definitely being more widely used than Phobos, so that's why it makes the list one spot higher than Phobos. And now we go to the number 5 spot, which is Petrova. Yeah, I talked about this card a bit earlier. It's mostly used in something like Hydro Hurricane to boost your Guardians, but it's not its only use. The other use is that it's often being played in aggro decks that use the Light Civilization, because its abilities that when you put it into the battle zone, you choose a race other than Mecha del Sol, and each creature of that race gets plus 4k power, and your opponent can choose it with its abilities. So he has to attack over it, and if you don't tap it by attacking, or if your opponent doesn't play something like Holy Awe, he can't really attack it unless he has untapped attackers. So Petrova is nice because it's yeah, it's really safe from nearly all removal cards. Just some specific fire removal spells can deal with it, or removal spells that require you as the player to choose it and get rid of it. And paired up with the power boost, it's just very strong, because it's hard for your opponent to get rid of the power boost, and with the power boost it's hard for your opponent to get rid of the other creatures as well. One thing to note is that it also helps your opponent's creatures. If you choose a race and they have creatures of that race, they also get powered up. That's one minor disadvantage, but still, yeah, a very strong card. Of course, it can't choose its own race, which is very useful, as it would be way too strong if it could boost itself to 7.5k that easily. But yeah, definitely the right spot here in the middle of the pack, I think, because it's very generic, but it's not really that broken that you would say, okay, I build a deck purely centered around Petrova, as it of course can't boost itself. It's just more of a support card. That's why it's not higher up on the list. And now let's go to the 4th place, which is Crazy Valkyrie the Drastic. Yeah, it's just a very strong evolution creature. It has the initiate race, like I said before. I think it's the best race in the Light Civilization, as yeah, it has the best evolution baits. And what is its ability? It can tap 2 creatures if you put it into the battle zone, and that has many purposes. It can you can get rid of 2 of your opponent's creatures by tapping them and then attacking over them. Or if you need to finish a game, you can tap up to 2 blockers from your opponent and then go for game. So the ability is very generic, and also by playing the best race in the Light Civ, it's also very generically used. It is typically found in something like Merino Control, but also in tribal aggro decks that use the Light Civilization and center around the Initiate race. And yeah, it can kill stuff like Balmedia, Steel Dragon, and yeah, that's an out to it. And yeah, just many different uses, killing opposing threats or just attacking and pushing for game with your aggressive strategy. And now we go into the top 3 of the Light Civilization, and at 3rd place we have Warlord Elsonius, so another evolution creature. And yeah, we think this is a bit better than Craze Valkyrie. Yeah, it's not really that generic, but its ability is just that powerful that you want to build a deck really centered around it. And yeah, the Elsonius deck is just trying to find Elsonius as fast as possible, and yeah, the best case scenario is that you can put it down on turn 5, and yeah, most decks don't have any answers on turn 5 for this card, because like the most used answer for this is Berserker Seal Dragon, which comes down yeah, for 8 costs, so way later, unless you can find a way to cheat it out a bit earlier. And its ability is the same as Petrova's second ability, that it can't be chosen by the opponent's creatures, like not creatures, just it can't be chosen by any abilities from the opponent. So he has to, yeah, get rid of it by battle, or something like Melnia as a counter to it, like Slayer creatures in general. But yeah, outside of some fringe options like something like Rotos, the Traveler, or Slayer creatures, it's really hard to deal with. Most of the time, the best option is to like swing a big evolution creature that you have into it and trade with it, like Fighter Dual Fang or Crystal Lancer. Yeah, that's maybe one of the more used answers to it, but still the Elsonius deck can have blockers like the Bilix that can, yeah, prevent that from happening. So it's just a threat on board that is so hard to answer that most of the time, if you drop this on turn 5, you're just going to win the game immediately, and your opponent can't really do anything about it. That's why it's definitely in the top 3 in our opinion. And now let's come to the 2nd place on our list, where we have Mistria Sonic Guardian. It's a really simple effect, just 2 lines of text. Whenever another creature is put into the battle zone, you may draw a card. So yeah, what this card has going for it, that it just can create such an unfair advantage over your opponent, because you benefit from every creature he puts into the battle zone, and every creature you play basically becomes an Aqua Hulkus in addition to what it already is. And yeah, this advantage can really just snowball out of control if you can manage to keep Mistrias around for a turn or 2. And yeah, that's really its only downside, that it only has 2k power, so it gets killed by basically any fire removal spell. And that's why you combine him with Petrova, Channeler of Suns, or Palo Alesis Morning Guardian, which were on this list before. And yeah, it really makes the Hydro Hurricane deck possible, where this is the main card to build up your board and gain advantage simultaneously. But it's also played in other mid-range decks or aggro decks, because yeah, it's just a high risk, high reward card. If you can keep it alive for a turn, it's just most of the time game over for the opponent. If it can't survive a turn, it's of course bad that you spend 5 mana on it. But yeah, the upside of these cards are basically endless. That's why it's definitely deserved to be so high on this list. And now, before we go to the number 1 spot, we have some honorable mentions. Call on the Oracle just didn't make the cut because its ability is just not that impactful. It gets outclassed by Shield Trigger from the Water Civilization in Aqua Surfer, but it's still not a bad card, don't get me wrong. Being a Lightbringer, it can be used in a Wise Starnoid deck, and also its Shield Trigger ability and being a body makes it very generic, so you can basically put him in nearly every light deck. That's not the problem. We just found that the ability is not that impactful that it made the top 10. And Juliana just gets outclassed by Palo Alesis just by a bit, because yeah, Juliana is a bit better against rush or aggro decks, as it can't be targeted by blocker removal abilities, but due to it being a Mecha del Sol, it can't be targeted by Petrova, and that yes, a huge downside, as it still dies to something like Searing Wave or Blizzard of Spears. And yeah, it's just a blocker. It just lies there. It doesn't have any other benefits than, yeah, just being an untargetable blocker. That's why Palo Alesis made it over this in the top 10 list, because it actually does something to your board in a positive way. And the last honorable mention here is Logic Cube, which is a good spell searcher in like mana burn variants that play light, or combo decks around Miraculous Meltdown, for example. But yeah, the impact of Phobos on the game itself, and yeah, it being a whole deck for itself makes it just a bit better. That's why we didn't include Logic Cube on the top 10 list. And if you haven't already guessed it, our number 1 spot on the Light Civilization list is Holy Awe. Yeah, it's just such a strong card. It's very generic. You can play it in almost every light deck. You can just splash it in, and it has a shield trigger ability, so if it gets broken in the shields, you can play it for free. And its ability is to tap all your opponent's creatures in the battle zone. Yeah, that ability is just so strong. Of course, this is also an iconic card, so yeah, the nostalgia really kicks in if you see this. It's from the first set in the base set DM1. But the ability, you have so many purposes. You can tap opposing creatures that are threats, and yeah, take them out by battle, attack them with your own creatures. So yeah, it's a form of mass removal for the Light Civilization. Then of course the obvious one, if it gets broken out of the shields, you can defend yourself by tapping all your opponent's creatures. They can't attack anymore. And yeah, combining this with something like Emerald or Mana Nexus, you can place it into the shield and know, yeah, you basically get a turn skip. You know, you get another turn to live and have another turn to finish the opponent. And the third use is that if your opponent walls up with blockers, you can just build your board and then play this and tap all the blockers, and yeah, basically all of your creatures become unblockable. So yeah, multi-use, very generic, strong ability. That's yeah, definitely the right recipe for our number 1 slot in our opinion. And yeah, now we're at the end of our video here, and now yeah, feel free to comment down below your opinion, what you think about this list, if you would change something. And until next time, see you guys.